Everyone has a father, present or absent, kind or cold. You know what I mean, don't you? Even if he was never there, he was still there, in the empty chair at dinner, in the silence where his voice should have been, in the way you learned to tie your shoes by watching other kids' dads from across the playground. Even if he left when you were 3, even if he died before you could remember his face. Even if he lived in the same house, but felt like a stranger who happened to share your last name. Everyone has a father. But maybe the fathers we had were just broken sons who didn't know how to try again. Maybe that man who couldn't say "I love you" was once a boy who never heard it himself. Maybe that distant figure who worked late every night was running from a silence he learned as a child. Maybe that angry voice that echoed through the house was just fear wearing the wrong mask. Can you blame someone who was never taught how to love? If that makes sense to you, my name is Dexter. I created this place for people who feel a lot, but don't talk too much. Subscribe, hit the bell, and now, let's talk. Do you agree with that, or does it sound like I'm making excuses for the inexcusable? Picture this with me for a moment. It's Saturday morning. You're maybe 8 years old. Cartoons are playing on the TV, but the volume is low because everyone's still sleeping. The house has that weekend quiet, you know the one, where time moves differently, where the light coming through the kitchen window looks softer, warmer. You pour yourself a bowl of cereal. The milk hits the flakes with that familiar sound. You're sitting at the table, legs swinging because your feet don't quite touch the floor yet. And you're waiting. Not consciously waiting. Not checking the clock or listening for footsteps. But there's this small part of you, this hopeful, patient part that's always waiting. Waiting for him to come downstairs. Waiting for him to ruffle your hair, waiting for him to sit next to you and ask about your dreams, your plans, your small 8-year-old thoughts that feel enormous in your chest. Sometimes he does come down. Sometimes he pours his own coffee, glances at you with tired eyes, maybe even smiles, says, "Morning, kiddo," in that gravelly morning voice. And for those few minutes, the kitchen feels complete. Like this is how Saturday mornings are supposed to be. But most times, you finish your cereal alone. You put the bowl in the sink, trying to be quiet, trying to be good. You go back to your cartoons, but they don't seem as funny anymore. And that waiting part of you, it doesn't give up. It just gets quieter. You carry that Saturday morning with you, long after you've grown tall enough that your feet touch the floor. Long after you've moved away and have your own kitchen, your own Saturday mornings. That feeling of waiting, it lives somewhere deep in your chest. And when someone asks you about your father, that's what you remember first. Not the arguments or the distance or the disappointment, just the waiting. The way love feels when it's almost there. I think about fathers differently now than I used to. There was a time when I measured them like we measure everything else. By what they gave us, by how present they were, by the words they said or didn't say, by their success at being what we needed them to be. But I've been thinking about something else lately, about how we become who we are, not just from what we receive, but from what we inherit. And I don't mean money or property or family names. I mean the invisible things. The patterns, the fears, the way silence gets passed down like an heirloom. No one wants, but everyone keeps. Think about your grandfather for a moment, or your father's father. Can you picture him? Maybe you knew him, maybe you only heard stories. But think about what his life was like, what he carried, what his father was like. We live in this strange time where we expect men to be emotionally available, present, nurturing. And that's not wrong. Children need that. But we forget that emotional availability is a skill, like playing piano or speaking a second language. You don't just wake up one day knowing how to do it. Your father learned how to be a father from watching his father, and his father learned from his father. And back it goes, this long chain of men trying to figure out how to love their children with tools they were never given. I'm not making excuses. I'm just looking at the whole picture. There's something we don't talk about much: the way men of certain generations were taught that love was providing, that being a good father meant working hard, paying bills, keeping the lights on, that feelings were private things, almost shameful things, that strength meant silence. Can you imagine growing up believing that? Can you imagine being 25, holding your first child, feeling this overwhelming rush of love and tenderness, and having no language for it? No examples of how to express it? No permission to even try? So you do what you know how to do. You work. You provide. You show up to school plays and soccer games. You fix broken bikes and teach multiplication tables. You love them the only way you know how, through action, through presence, through the quiet dedication of responsibility. And your child grows up feeling almost loved, fed and housed and educated, but somehow still hungry, still waiting for something they can't name. I want to tell you about small things, because fathers live in small things. The way he always checked the locks before bed. Every night, the same routine: front door, back door, windows. You thought it was obsessive, maybe unnecessary, but now you do it too. And you realize it wasn't about the locks. It was about protecting what mattered most to him, even if he never said you mattered most. The way he taught you to throw a baseball, not with big speeches about technique or strategy, just here, like this. His hand guiding yours, showing you how to grip the seams, how to step into the throw. And for those 20 minutes in the backyard, you had his complete attention, his patience, his hope that you'd get it right. The way he always sat in the same chair. You probably complained about it. Dad, you always sit there. But that chair was his anchor, the one place in the house that was his. And even now, when you visit your childhood home, no one sits in that chair. It still belongs to him. The way he worried about money, even when there was enough. The way he'd go quiet when bills came in the mail. The way he'd work extra hours before Christmas or birthdays, not because he had to, but because he wanted to make sure. Always making sure. And you thought he was distant, distracted. But he was calculating, figuring out how to give you what you needed, what you wanted, what he never had. The way he knew exactly how you liked your sandwich cut. Diagonal, not straight across. No mustard, extra mayo. He never made a big deal about remembering these things. They were just stored somewhere, part of his internal database of taking care of you. The way he'd stand in your doorway at night sometimes, not saying anything, just checking, making sure you were okay, safe, breathing. And you'd pretend to be asleep because talking felt awkward, but you knew he was there. You felt protected, watched over. The way he taught you to drive, patient with the clutch, calm when you stalled at red lights. It's okay. Try again. Never angry, never frustrated. Because he remembered learning to drive. He remembered being 16 and scared and trying so hard to get it right. These aren't the moments we remember when we're angry with our fathers. When we're listing their failures, their absences, their silence. But they're there, quietly there. Like background music you only notice when it stops playing. Here's what breaks my heart about fathers. They're trying to love us with broken tools. Imagine this. You're 7 years old. Your father comes home from work tired, stressed. carrying invisible weight you can't understand. You run up to him excited about your day, about the picture you drew, about the friend you made at school. And he pats your head absently, says, "That's nice, buddy," and walks past you to collapse in his chair. You feel dismissed, unimportant, like your excitement doesn't matter to him. But what if he learned that work problems stay at work, that children shouldn't have to carry adult worries? What if he's trying to protect you from his stress, his fear, his exhaustion? What if that distant pat on the head isn't dismissal, but discipline? The discipline of not dumping his heavy day on your light one. What if he's trying to be strong for you the only way he knows how? I think about the generation of men who fought wars, who grew up during depressions, who learned that survival meant emotional control. They came home and tried to be fathers to children who needed warmth, affection, emotional connection. And they had no map for that territory. So they loved through providing, through showing up, through quiet consistency, through fixing things and teaching practical skills and being a steady presence even when they felt like anything but steady inside. And we, their children, felt the distance. We felt the silence. We felt almost loved, but not quite loved enough. And we carry that feeling with us like a scar that never quite heals. But what if that distance was then trying to give us space to be different than they were? What if that silence was then not knowing what to say, not them not caring? What if their love was there all along, just translated into a language we didn't recognize? I'm not saying it was enough. I'm not saying it didn't hurt. I'm not saying we should be grateful for emotional crumbs or settle for love that feels like duty. I'm just saying, maybe they were trying, with whatever they had, with whatever they learned, with whatever wasn't broken inside them by their own fathers who were trying with whatever they had. There's this moment that happens sometimes. You're an adult now, maybe a parent yourself, and you catch yourself doing something, handling a situation, responding to stress, showing affection, and you realize you sound just like him, your father, the one you swore you'd never become. And for a second, you're angry, frustrated, like you failed some test you didn't know you were taking. But then you notice something else. The thing you're doing, the way you're handling it, it's actually not bad. Maybe it's even good. Maybe what you thought was weakness or distance or failure was actually strength. A different kind of strength than you wanted, but strength nonetheless. Maybe that silence you resented was him teaching you that not every feeling needs to be spoken, that some things are carried quietly, with dignity, without making them everyone else's problem. Maybe that emotional distance was him showing you that love isn't always soft and warm and affirming. Sometimes love is staying when everything in you wants to leave. Sometimes love is working when you're tired. Sometimes love is being present even when presence feels impossible. Maybe he was teaching you resilience without calling it resilience. Maybe he was showing you how to be strong without making strength look easy. Maybe he loved you the best way he knew how, with whatever wasn't broken inside him. And maybe that was actually enough. Different than what you needed, but enough. I want to tell you something that might be hard to hear. Your father is not your enemy. I know that might sound wrong if he hurt you, if he left, if he was absent or angry or cold or cruel, if he chose addiction over family, work over presence, silence over connection. I know it might sound like I'm asking you to forgive what shouldn't be forgiven, to excuse what shouldn't be excused, to make peace with damage that changed the shape of your life. I'm not, but I want you to consider something. Your father is also someone's son. He was also 7 years old once, running up to his own father with excitement about his day. He was also a child who needed warmth, affection, emotional connection. He was also someone who learned about love from someone who learned about love from someone who learned about love. And somewhere in that chain, something broke. Or maybe it was never whole to begin with. Maybe his father worked 3 jobs and was never home. Maybe his father died young, or left, or never learned how to be gentle with children because no one was ever gentle with him. Maybe his father was also doing the best he could with broken tools, and the tools just kept getting more broken with each generation. I think about the weight our fathers carried. The pressure to provide, to protect, to be strong, to never show weakness, to fix everything, to know everything, to be everything their family needed. And how impossible that is. How crushing that responsibility must have felt to someone who was just figuring out how to be human themselves. Your father made mistakes. Maybe terrible ones. Maybe ones that shape you in ways you're still trying to understand or undo. Maybe ones that deserve anger, grief, boundaries, distance. But your father was also trying. Maybe failing, but trying. Maybe with the wrong tools, the wrong examples, the wrong understanding of what children need. But trying. And recognizing that doesn't minimize your pain. It doesn't excuse his failures. It doesn't mean you have to forgive or forget or pretend everything is okay. It just means he's human, flawed and limited and carrying his own wounds, just like you, just like me, just like everyone who's ever tried to love someone and not known exactly how. There's something powerful about seeing your father as a whole person instead of just the person who disappointed you. It doesn't change what happened, but it changes how you carry what happened. When you see him as someone who was also hurt, also trying, also failing at things that mattered to him. When you see him as someone's broken son instead of just your imperfect father, something shifts. The anger doesn't disappear, but it gets softer, more complicated, less about blame and more about understanding. Less about what you didn't get and more about what he didn't have to give. And maybe, in that shift, you find something you didn't expect to find. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation necessarily, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from putting down a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. The weight of expecting someone to be different than they are. The weight of needing them to acknowledge, apologize, change, become the father you needed them to be. Maybe you realize you can love your father for who he was, not who you needed him to be. Maybe you can be grateful for what he gave you, even if it wasn't what you wanted. Maybe you can see his love in the language he spoke, even if you wished he spoke yours. Here's what I've learned about fathers and sons, fathers and daughters, fathers and the children who carry their names and their genes and their unspoken hopes. We spend so much time trying to become different than them, better than them, more present, more emotionally available, more connected, more aware. And that's not wrong. Growth is good. Evolution is necessary. But somewhere in all that trying to be different, we forget to see what we inherited that's worth keeping. My father taught me how to be on time, how to keep my word, how to work hard even when I don't feel like it, how to take care of things, cars, houses, relationships, responsibilities, how to be someone others can depend on. He didn't teach me these things with lectures or life lessons. He taught me by being those things, consistently, quietly, without making a big deal about it. And for years, I took those qualities for granted. I focused on what he didn't give me, the emotional connection, the deep conversations, the expressed affection. I measured him by standards he didn't even know existed. But now I see the gift in what he did give me, the foundation, the example of showing up day after day, even when showing up was hard, the model of responsibility, of integrity, of quiet strength. Those aren't small things. Those are the things that hold families together, communities together, lives together. Your father gave you things too. Maybe not the things you wanted most, maybe not the things you needed most, but things, real things, important things. Maybe he gave you work ethic. Maybe he gave you humor. Maybe he gave you curiosity or determination or the ability to fix things with your hands. Maybe he gave you stubbornness that you call persistence now. Maybe he gave you caution that you call wisdom now. Maybe he gave you the gift of knowing what kind of parent you want to be by showing you what you don't want to repeat. Maybe he gave you resilience by letting you figure some things out on your own. Maybe he gave you independence by not solving all your problems. Maybe he gave you strength by not always being soft. Maybe what felt like absence was actually space. Space for you to become yourself, to make your own mistakes, to find your own way. I'm not saying his absence was intentional. I'm not saying it was the right choice. I'm just saying, maybe there are gifts hidden inside even the difficult parts of having him as a father. Maybe the distance taught you how to be alone without being lonely. Maybe the silence taught you how to listen. Maybe the emotional unavailability taught you how to validate yourself, how to find your own worth, how to love yourself, even when love from others feels conditional or absent. Maybe you're stronger than you would have been with a different father. Maybe you're more empathetic because you know what it feels like to need something you can't have. Maybe you're more determined because you learned early that you can't depend on others to give you what you need. His imperfection made you more perfectly yourself. There's something I want you to think about. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. When we hold on to anger, resentment, disappointment about our fathers, we think we're protecting ourselves. We think we're honoring our pain, maintaining our boundaries, refusing to let them off the hook for their failures. And sometimes, that's true. Sometimes anger is appropriate. Sometimes boundaries are necessary. Sometimes people don't deserve forgiveness because they're not safe. Not sorry, not different. But sometimes we hold on to anger because it feels easier than feeling the sadness underneath it. Because anger makes us feel powerful, in control, justified. Sadness just makes us feel sad, vulnerable, human. Sometimes we hold on to resentment because it gives us someone to blame for the parts of our lives that feel hard or incomplete or broken. And blame feels simpler than accepting that life is just hard sometimes, that some wounds heal imperfectly, that some needs go unmet, not because someone chose to withhold what we needed, but because they genuinely didn't have it to give. I'm not telling you to forgive your father. That's not my choice to make, and it's not always the right choice anyway. I'm just asking you to consider what you're carrying, and whether carrying it is serving you, whether the anger is protecting you or imprisoning you, whether the resentment is keeping you safe or keeping you stuck. Because here's the thing about fathers. They live in us whether we want them to or not. In our voices, our gestures, our reactions to stress. In the way we handle responsibility, show love, deal with conflict. In the things we're drawn to and the things we avoid. You can spend your whole life trying not to be like your father, but you'll still be shaped by him. You can cut him out of your life completely, but you'll still carry his influence. So maybe it's worth finding a way to make peace with that influence, to sort through what's worth keeping and what needs to be changed, to honor what he gave you and grieve what he couldn't, to see him clearly, not as the perfect father you needed, not as the terrible father your anger makes him, but as the complicated, flawed, trying human being he actually was. Maybe it's worth recognizing that he did the best he could with what he had, and that his best wasn't enough for what you needed, and that both of those things can be true at the same time. Maybe it's worth letting him be human, limited, imperfect, trying and failing and trying again, just like all of us. Maybe it's worth letting yourself be his child, not the child who needed more, not the child who deserved better, but the child who was loved imperfectly by someone who loved imperfectly, because that's the only way any of us know how to love. Maybe it's worth seeing that you survived him. You survived his distance, his silence, his absence, his anger, his limitations. You survived and became someone capable of love, of growth, of being better than what you came from. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. I think about legacy differently than I used to. We talk about legacy like it's something we leave behind after we're gone. But really, legacy is something we create every day we're alive. Every interaction, every choice, every moment we decide how to be with the people who matter to us. Your father's legacy isn't just what he accomplished professionally or what he provided materially. It's also the daily shape of how he existed in the world, how he treated people when no one was watching, how he handled disappointment, stress, joy, responsibility, how he loved and failed to love and tried to love anyway. And that legacy lives in you, in ways you're aware of and ways you're not, in patterns you've repeated and patterns you've broken, in strengths you inherited and wounds you're still healing. But here's what I find beautiful about this. You get to decide what to do with that legacy. You get to keep what serves you and change what doesn't. You get to take the best parts of who he was and build on them. You get to take the broken parts and heal them, or at least not pass them on. You get to be the father he couldn't be, to your own children, to yourself, to the parts of you that are still that 8-year-old sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. You get to break cycles that have been repeating for generations. You get to create new patterns, new ways of showing love, new definitions of what it means to be strong. You get to say the words he couldn't say, express the feelings he couldn't express, show up in ways he couldn't show up. Not because you're better than him, not because you're stronger or smarter or more enlightened, but because you have tools he didn't have, examples he didn't have, permission he didn't have, healing he didn't have. You get to love your children the way you needed to be loved. You get to be present the way you needed presence. You get to create the safety, the connection, the emotional availability that you craved. And in doing that, in being the parent you needed, you're not rejecting your father. You're completing him. You're taking what he started and making it whole. You're healing the wound that created the wound that created the wound. Going back generations of fathers who are trying with broken tools. Maybe that's how forgiveness actually works. Not as absolution, not as forgetting, but as transformation. Taking what was broken and making something beautiful from the pieces. Maybe the greatest honor you can give your father isn't pretending he was perfect. It's becoming the kind of person who can love imperfect people, who can see the trying inside the failing, who can hold space for complexity, for contradiction, for the messy reality of human beings doing their best with whatever they have. Maybe the greatest gift he gave you wasn't what he provided. It was the opportunity to become someone who provides what he couldn't. Someone who shows up where he couldn't show up. Someone who loves more completely because you know what incomplete love feels like. There's a moment that comes, if you're lucky. If you live long enough and pay attention enough and let yourself feel enough, you're looking at your father, maybe literally, maybe just in your memory. And instead of seeing the man who disappointed you, you see the boy he used to be. The child who had his own Saturday mornings, his own waiting, his own father who loved imperfectly or not at all. You see his fear masquerading as anger, his hurt disguised as distance, his love expressed in the only language he knew, responsibility, provision, quiet consistency. You see him trying, not succeeding always, but trying, with whatever wasn't broken inside him, with whatever tools he inherited from his own imperfect father. And something softens. Not everything, not all at once, but something. The anger is still there, it may always be there, and that's okay. The disappointment remains. It's real, it's valid, it matters. The wish for something different, something more, something closer to what you needed. That doesn't disappear. But alongside all of that, there's something new. Something like understanding. Something like compassion. Something like peace. The peace of seeing someone clearly instead of seeing them through the lens of your own need. The peace of accepting what was instead of demanding what should have been. The peace of loving someone, not because they earned it or deserved it, but because love is what you choose to do with your heart. And maybe in that moment, you realize something surprising. You don't need him to be different anymore. You don't need him to acknowledge his failures or apologize for his absence or become the father you needed him to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. You're okay. You survived. You became someone capable of love despite receiving imperfect love. You learned how to be present despite experiencing absence. You figured out how to be the kind of person you needed, even if you didn't have that example from him. Maybe his imperfection was perfect for making you who you are. Maybe his limitations created space for your growth. Maybe his inability to give you everything you needed taught you how to give yourself what you need. Maybe he was exactly the father you needed to become exactly who you're supposed to be. Not because his failures were good, not because his absence was a gift, not because everything happens for a reason or works out for the best, but because you are resilient, because humans are adaptable, because love finds a way, even when it's not the love we expected or wanted or felt we deserved. Because sometimes the most profound gift a parent can give their child is the opportunity to become stronger, more compassionate, more whole than they were able to be themselves. I want to leave you with this. Your father is not your enemy. He's not your savior either. He's not the source of all your problems or the answer to all your questions. He's just a man, a flawed, trying, limited, human man who was given the impossible task of raising a human being when he was still figuring out how to be human himself. He made mistakes, maybe terrible ones, maybe ones that shaped you in ways that still hurt, maybe ones that require boundaries, distance, careful protection of your own heart. But he also tried, in whatever way he knew how, with whatever tools he had, with whatever love lived inside him that wasn't broken by his own story, his own wounds, his own imperfect father. And you are not just the sum of his failures or the product of his limitations. You are the sum of your own choices. your own growth, your own determination to be better, to love more completely, to show up more fully than what you experienced. You are proof that cycles can be broken, that wounds can heal, that love can grow in the cracks of imperfect childhoods and bloom into something more beautiful than what came before. You are your Father's child, yes, but you are also your own person, shaped by Him but not defined by Him, influenced by His story but writing your own. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Maybe the question isn't whether you can blame someone who has never taught how to love. Maybe the question is whether you can love someone who has never taught how to be loved. Maybe the question is whether you can break the cycle, whether you can be the one who learns, who grows, who becomes the kind of person who loves not because it was modeled perfectly, but because love is what you choose to do with your life. Whether you can be the kind of person who sees the broken child inside the distant father, who holds space for complexity, who chooses compassion without sacrificing truth. Whether you can be the one who transforms the wound into wisdom, who takes what was lacking and creates abundance, who receives imperfect love and learns to give love more perfectly. Not perfectly. There's no such thing as perfect love, but more perfectly, with more presence, more patience, more grace. Maybe that's your legacy. Not what you received, but what you give. Not how you were fathered, but how you father. Your own children, yourself, the wounded parts of the world that need someone who understands what it means to need something you can't have. Maybe that's how the story changes. One generation at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of choosing love over resentment, understanding over anger, growth over staying stuck in what went wrong. Maybe that's how broken sons become healing fathers, how absent becomes present, how silence becomes connection. Maybe that's how we honor the fathers we had, not by pretending they were perfect, but by becoming the kind of people who can love imperfect people. Maybe that's how we honor the fathers we needed, not by staying angry that they couldn't be what we needed, but by becoming what the next generation needs. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. The waiting is over. The Saturday morning has passed. The child you were is safe now, held by the adult you've become. And the father you had, he was doing his best. It wasn't enough for what you needed, but it was enough for what he had to give. And you are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough, exactly as you are, exactly as you were, exactly as you're becoming. That's what I want you to remember when you think about fathers, when you think about your father, when you think about yourself. You are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough. And maybe that's what love looks like when it finally grows up. When it stops demanding perfection and starts celebrating presence. When it stops focusing on what's missing and starts noticing what's there. When it stops waiting for Saturday morning and starts creating its own quiet moments of connection, understanding, peace. When it stops being a child needing to be loved and becomes an adult choosing to love. Maybe that's when the real conversation with your father begins. Not the one where you're asking him to be different, but the one where you're finally ready to see him exactly as he is and love him anyway. Not because he earned it, not because he deserves it, not because it fixes anything or changes anything or makes anything that happened okay, but because love is what you do with your heart when you're brave enough to keep it open, even when it's been broken, even when it's been disappointed, even when it's been waiting for something that never came. Love anyway. That's what fathers teach us in the end. Not how to be perfect, but how to love imperfectly and keep trying anyway. How to show up even when showing up is hard. How to stay even when staying hurts. How to keep your heart open even when opening your heart feels dangerous. How to be human, flawed and limited and trying anyway. How to be enough even when enough doesn't feel like nearly enough. How to love even when you don't know how, especially when you don't know how. That's the lesson. That's the gift. That's what gets passed down from father to child to father to child, generation after generation of people trying to figure out how to love each other with broken tools and imperfect hearts, and the stubborn hope that somehow, some way, love will be enough. It is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough, even when it doesn't look like love, even when it doesn't feel like love, even when it's wrapped in silence or distance or the quiet desperation of someone who doesn't know how to say what they feel. Love finds a way. It found a way to you, through him, imperfectly, incompletely, but truly. And now it's your turn to let it find its way through you, to whoever needs it, however they need it, for as long as they need it. That's what fathers do. They love. Imperfectly, but truly. Always truly. Even when true doesn't look like what we expected love to look like. Even when true doesn't feel like what we needed love to feel like. True anyway. Love anyway. That's the story. That's the legacy. That's what gets passed down. That's what you carry forward. That's enough. That's everything.